What's up everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of Bonsai-U. This time around we're going to be taking a look at this monstrosity next to me here. This is what's known as a Natsugumi here in Japan. It's basically a silverberry, but it's one that flowers and blooms and produces fruits in the summer rather than in the winter. Now, with this particular species here, the foliage type is actually quite large relative to kangumi, which is Eleagnus pungens or standard silverberry. So what I want to do in this episode is walk you through the basic pruning process on this tree, which is going to be very similar to most of our alternating leaf pattern trees. But in doing so, I want to look at the structure of the plant and discuss with you some potential options for the future of this tree, because the large foliage on this tree might make it difficult to develop a fine branch ramification on. So let's take this tree into the workshop and take a closer look at the branch structure. All right, so now that we've brought this into the workshop here, you can see it a little bit better, I think, in the video. So just to give you a little bit of background on this tree, this was brought into Fujikawa kouka-en here last year. And Michael McTagg, one of the apprentices here, or now professionals who works here at the nursery, actually wired up this tree. You can see within the branch structure here, we've got a couple of pieces of rebar. Those were utilized by Michael to pull big branches and I believe the apex up into position. So the tree obviously had no leaves on it over the winter, and it's flushed out tremendously with a new repot in this new container here, which was done this spring. But the reason that I really love this tree and wanted to buy this tree is because it's not fully developed quite yet. It's very rare as well to see a Natsugumi like this, and it's even more rare to find a gumi in general that has this age on it with this kind of bark and nabari. It's almost impossible to find. So despite the fact that the foliage is quite large, I thought this was a cool thing to purchase and to have at Eisei-en Kyoto going forward. All right, so what we're going to do in this episode, like I said, is we're going to cut everything back and we're probably going to be doing defoliation on this tree. But the reason I say probably is because I am debating right now as to whether or not I want to keep it as a Natsugumi with its natural foliage, or if I want to try to graft a different kind of foliage, actual kangumi or Eleagnus pungens, which is just standard silverberry. The foliage on those is much smaller, berries are much smaller as well, and we can actually completely transform this tree by doing that. I'm leaning more towards that option, but because this is the first year that I've ever worked with this tree, I do want to see how it responds to partial outer canopy defoliation, or at least I'm kind of leaning in that direction at this point. It may very well be that the leaves reduce a little bit and are workable if we perform POCD on this tree. I'm hoping that the secondary flush will be a little smaller, and even if it's not, even if it flushes with relatively large leaves again, I can in fact cut those leaves in half or down by 2/3 to reduce their photosynthetic surface area and slow down the rate of thickening of the branches that are attached to those leaves. So I'm going to debate a little bit more here about this tree and decide exactly what I want to do. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start pruning back all of the extension shoots on the plant to the first, second, or third leaf, depending on the scenario. All right, so let's take a look at this shoot right here. You can see we've got a massive extension on here. The first leaves are actually buried way deep down at the bottom down here. And this is another species, like most of our alternating leaf pattern, that typically have a susaba, or again, that budless leaf. This particular shoot, actually the first leaf on it, which you can't see from where you're viewing the video here, it's this little bitty guy down here. It actually does have a bud at the bottom of it, so it's technically not a susaba. A lot of the other shoots on here will have susaba, but in the case of this one, we could actually include this little guy in our leaf count, so we'd have 1 and then 2. The problem with the second leaf is that it's pointing straight up and going back towards the interior of the tree. So I'm actually going to come out to our third leaf on here and cut that back for now. So the orientation of the next shoot will emerge downward on this angle here, which is exactly what we want. Thought I'd point this out to you guys here too. This is actually the fruit of the Natsugumi here, which is bright reddish color. I'm not exactly sure how big or what color this will become over the next couple of months here, but I'm going to try to leave any of these that I find on the tree because I'm actually curious how they're going to turn out on this particular specimen. All right, so now that I've pruned back all of the extension shoots to the first or second leaf, you can see that the structure of the tree is actually quite interesting. So I think it's going to make more sense at this point just to try to experiment with this tree by doing partial outer canopy defoliation on it this year and see how the tree responds to that. If we can produce a smaller set of growth and more ramification that way, I would like to build this tree out as a Natsugumi, because again, it's not a very common thing to see. In the future, if for some reason it's just not producing the fine ramification that I want on it, we may switch the foliage out by utilizing whips of Eleagnus pungens or just standard silverberry, and approach grafting or thread grafting those into the older structure of the tree. I would assume that a project like that would probably take a good 8 to 10 years before we really switch everything out and start to make it look worthwhile. So it's going to be a long-term project if we go that route. So again, I just want to experiment with it this year and do the defoliation on it. Now, there are a few shoots within the tree that I've left alone. One in particular you can see in the front here is actually this guy. This is going to be a nice branch here to develop into this space. So I'm leaving that branch on there. We're not going to be defoliating that, and I will put a little bit of wire on that at the end. There are a couple other shoots internally that are going to be utilized to fill in space as well, so I'm not going to decapitate or defoliate those. But the rest of the tree, 80–90% of the foliage will in fact be taken off. So I'm going to get to that, and then I'll show you what the structure of the tree looks like from there. So one thing I do want to mention with this tree is that because the leaves are large and the internodes are slightly elongated, in most instances across the tree, with pruning back the elongating shoots, I did in fact prune back to the first leaf with a dormant bud at the base. You know, we talk about typically on average pruning back to the second leaf with a bud at the base, and that usually gives you not only a safety net just in case the last one dies back, but also the potentiality of creating double the ramification. With this tree, again, in certain areas where the internodes were long, I pruned back to the first leaf, which is going to limit to some degree the amount of ramification that we can develop in a single year, because we've only got one bud that's going to sprout a new flush of growth now that we've cut back. But it reduces the internode, so it's kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of scenario. We're delaying things a little bit by pruning back to the first leaf, but I think I can create tighter ramification on this tree in the long run, so I think it's going to be worth it. So my goal with this particular shoot here is to fill this gap in right here. Might be hard to see, but at the base of this branch, there was a large branch that was cut off previously, probably by the original owner of the tree. So this shoot is sprouted out right from the base of that cut site, which is pretty typical, but that's left a big gap in this area, so I want to fill that in with this shoot. So this shoot is obviously brand new, and the rest of the branching on the tree is quite old. So I don't want to decapitate the end of this shoot because that will just slow down the progress of this branch. So what we're going to do is bend this into position here. I'm going to slightly over-exaggerate it. And then the end of the branch here, I'm going to lift up and out and allow this to continue to grow for this growing season, so that this will thicken this branch here to a proper degree. And we'll then be able to cut this branch back sometime next year. If it gets out of hand this year, I might lop the end of it off, but in general, I'm going to try to let it run all year. Then next year, we cut the end of it off and we can start developing some ramification further back in. All right, so we brought our Natsugumi back out here into the nursery here and put it back on the bench, and you can see that the structure is now wide open. All of the internal growth is now exposed to the sun, or at least when we do have a sunny day here in Osaka next time, it will be exposed to the sun. One thing to consider with any tree that you do this type of POCD to is that those inner leaves that have been shaded out for the entire growing season thus far, now that they're exposed to the sun, they will burn very, very quickly. So on a cloudy day like today, today, not a big deal, but when it does get sunny, for example, tomorrow's gonna be pretty sunny here, the shade cloth will need to be pulled out over this tree so that it doesn't burn. So those trees will become much less susceptible to sunburn as they harden off a bit more and become used to the exposure. So, over the course of the next, let's say 3 to 4 weeks or so. But in the interim, new leaves will start emerging and eventually they'll be shaded out a little bit again. And when that does happen, I want to come back down here and walk you through the next steps with this particular tree because we're going to have to do something with the secondary flush of growth if it is in fact quite large. So again, this is a bit of an experiment with this particular species as it's the first one that I've ever worked with. But as you can see, I mean, the structure on the trunk, the structure of the branches is all excellent. Michael did a great job of placing the branches in a way that gives it a very naturalistic but refined look. So really nice taper to the tree and movement all the way to the top as well. So I'm surprised that the wire hasn't really bitten in at all because this was put on last winter. There were a few places that I did cut off, but in general it's looking pretty good. So we're going to leave it on for a bit longer and then we'll address that as needed a little bit further into the growing season. So I hope you guys are excited, like I am, about the future of this tree in developing it out again as an experiment. So I'll keep you guys posted as we build it out and let you know, the nuanced differences between this and say, regular Kouka-en or Eleagnus pungens going forward. So thank you guys so much for checking out this episode of Bonsai-U. Look forward to seeing all of you next time around, and until then, take care.